thanks everybody for joining us today. As you might have seen in some different places through the material that we sent out announcing what was going to be happening here, Vince and I are going to not completely cheesy, but kind of sort of role play a little bit of our way through here. And the place that we'll be doing this is, well, see, Vince reports up to me, like literally within the IMAGINiT world. He is on my team. So I'm going to be playing the part of a pointy-haired manager guy. We'll talk about it a little bit more in detail. But as it works out through here, I've got a lot of time with IMAGINiT. I've been here for 23, almost 24 years. Prior to this, did a lot of schools and healthcare centers in design before joining IMAGINiT. I've done everything from support to being a trainer within IMAGINiT to teaching. Actually, I taught, what was it called? 3DS. Before it was just 3DS, there was
a version of
it. Yeah, 3DS Viz or 3D Viz, whatever it was.
Yeah.
If you know, you know. If you don't, it doesn't matter. But it's gone now. Done all sorts of stuff with visualization, but lately I haven't been able to dig into the Twinmotion thing because I got the whole pointy hair manager thing going on lately. I get to deal with everybody that does everything in buildings, so design, construction, facilities management, the whole kit and caboodle. And that's my lot in life, and I'm at peace with that now. The guy that does get to play with all the fun toys is Vince. Maybe a quick introduction of yourself.
Sure, thanks, Joe. Vince Daniele here. Been with IMAGINiT for 12 years, and as Joe mentioned, I report up to him. I manage our construction team, and I lead our partnership with Epic Games and Twinmotion. So we formed our partnership with them about 2 years ago, and ever since then, I've been working with my team to create custom curriculum and training for Twinmotion fundamentals, and just really excited that at AU they announced that Epic was partnering up with Autodesk and including Twinmotion in basically every license of Revit. So we know that for our customers, this is going to reach out to a broad range of our customers and probably people that really weren't fully interested in visualization or using Twinmotion because of the cost implications. Now don't have to worry about that. So we're really excited to present today, and hopefully we can do a good job in communicating to everyone where the benefits of Twinmotion are for the everyday user.
Cool. So kind of building off that a little bit, the whole idea of why we're here. There was that announcement about a month ago now of Autodesk and Twinmotion working together to make Twinmotion available to everybody who has an active subscription of Revit in a future release. There are some obviously cloudy answers, statements within that. And there are going to be places where you might have some questions that we don't have an answer for yet. But we'll be working through things as much as possible. But like Vince said, this is coming around soon, so let's get our heads around it as quickly as we can to start preparing ourselves. Because if we're going to get this tool available to everybody who's got Revit, well, what can we do with it? How can we leverage it to our benefit as we're going through it all? That's the intent of what we're doing. Will it displace software that you're paying for now and just can recoup that funding and spend it somewhere else because you don't have to pay for software X? Will you want to use it in conjunction with software X? There's all decisions that'll have to be made, and it'll be personal to you. Certainly we'll have some opinions on it, but our opinion might be different from yours. So there's some things to look forward to as we're going through this. So the overall presentation style of what we're looking to do here is trying to keep it along a theme. So if we're doing this as how can Twinmotion help the everyday Revit user, I might not be playing the role of an everyday Revit user, but at least a Twinmotion. At first time we put together some wording for the marketing release on this webcast, we called it, I was going to be the Twinmotion noob. Somewhere through the editing process, it became a little bit more formalized. A novice or something else got thrown into the naming in there. But trying to take this spot of I don't really and truly necessarily know everything that I'm talking about. So I've got to talk to somebody else who does know what's happening and turn around to see how can we use this in some active live type scenarios. So that's me, and that's the role that Vince is going to be playing. And I'm asking for your assistance, and I'm probably going to regret this to some extent, but I'm asking for your aid in what types of questions would you want to ask? If you're like me, somebody who just doesn't know that much about Twinmotion, this is going to be coming in and becoming available to me to use daily if I wanted to. What are some things that you would want to ask the Twinmotion expert as we're talking about the way things can flow between Revit and Twinmotion? As you're doing that, I'll ask that you get those questions into the Q&A panel inside our meeting, our webcast here. And I'll be tracking those and trying to tack off the ones that fit within the theme of whatever we're talking about at the moment, and just slip them on into our conversation. So I may not always get back to providing an answer for every single one of these, but we'll be slipping it in, and you'll know if I ask your question that, hey, that was mine, and we'll get it rolling. So that is our theme for today, knowing that we'll leave some time at the end for a broader sense of other questions that didn't fit into the stream of how things were going through the presentation or wherever else. Now, the flip side of that also means that there's a lot of things that are just going to be going live for us. We've got a Revit model that we're going to use, sure, but this is going to be fun. This is going to be trying to see where it goes. The starting point then, if I put on my pointy-haired manager hat and hop over, this is the building that we're going to be working with. It's an actual real building that does exist. Vince is actually conveniently well familiar with this particular building, but this is my Revit model. And the idea with Twinmotion, it is visualization. So me as project architect or designer X, whatever role you want to try and throw it through, I want to have something that looks a little bit prettier in here. So if I wanted to do something in Revit, so we can have this compare and contrast from the quick and easy what you can do in Revit to the quick and easy of what we can do somewhere else. I've got the building, I want to make it prettier for people to see, so I'll say, well, let's go to shaded with edges, we'll turn on some shadows, and we'll see how things perform. Now, my computer is admittedly not all that in a bag of chips. I have integrated video on my laptop, no dedicated video card whatsoever, but it does it reasonably well for some basic things in Revit. If I wanted to go from here to say, well, let's go to realistic to try and get something looking a little bit better, I've got some basic topography underneath, and now I'm starting to spin. So there we go. It's very tiled sort of looking here, but I can do it. I can work with it. If we go over to properties, Vince is probably walking down the hall trying to see what I'm doing to this project that he spent so much time working on as I'm rendering this out. Go into a perspective view eventually. So there we go. I can use my view cube if I want to get around in here. If I wanted to have an exterior shot, an interior shot, I'm starting to see some things that looks okay. Well, I hit a render button, and to save some time, because knowing I'm on an underpowered laptop, I hit the render button, just the basic sort of rendering thing that we've got down here. And I did an initial, I don't forget if it was draft or medium. It got done pretty quickly and gave me an image that looks like this. I just did a corner. It's kind of now then I thought, well, I need something a little bit better than just this to show my customer. Kind of And so I went into the rendering mode and said, go to best. And I let it run for 13 minutes on my computer, and I got that. So flipping back and forth, it might be, with a delay on a webcast like this, there's not that much of a difference on my computer. The light coming through and reflecting down here is a little bit different, but not that much of a difference between draft and here. So it's okay, but I would need to spruce it up. I need to get some foliage in here. One of the things I was thinking of doing was going over to floor plan view, and I was going to go through and link in some CAD files that had where plants were going to be located, and use a tool that we've got in here for some IMAGINiT utilities for Revit, and swap out the AutoCAD block for that background file with an actual Revit family, so I can get some better looking trees, some interior plants to spruce it up a little bit, make things look a little bit better. And one of the things that I asked Vince to come around and kind of look over my shoulder as I'm doing this is I'm going to replace that. But in order to get it to look good and I get some good renderings in Revit, I went out to the internet and I do those things that I'm sure a lot of people are going to cringe a little bit here on again. But I went out to the internet. I did a search for Revit plant family or Revit tree family. I forget what exactly I searched for. And I found a couple things that I wanted to bring in. I had a family here that's a vase with some roses. This looks decent. They'll render out okay. It's not some leaves, but I've got some nice spirals in here. This will work out pretty well. I also grabbed a family for, go away, bonsai tree. And it looks like there's even some leaves that fell down here on the ground. So I was going to pull this into Revit and use this one. So there's that family. I was going to go ahead and bring in, I've got a thing here for just a little shrubbery that I can pull in. Use this for a family. It's got all sorts of good faces and things for me to look in. So that's going to be great in Revit. I've got over here some grass with seeds and rocks that are built in. I'm going to just array this and copy it probably a few dozen times at least around the building to make it happen. And then I've got this family for just a tree that I can pull in. That'll be a nice, level of detail for me for the tree here. And all of those families, if I'm looking at it, came out to be these files here. And so as I'm going through this, Vince, before I start doing this stuff, I want to let you know what I am doing and is this going to be okay? And I know it took me like 16 minutes to do the render last time on my computer. It'll probably be closer to half an hour now to do something
this
better.
Is a really bad idea, Joe, and you should probably step away from your mouse. So for those of you who have used Revit, you know that the rendering capabilities and the visualization is okay. And as Joe pointed out on his integrated GPU, he can do some stuff, but Revit's a great tool for doing a lot of different things, but it is not a great tool for creating high-end visualization quickly. And it is not meant to process these really high poly count parts of geometry, like this tree that if anyone on my team were to download this tree and put it into a project that I was managing and copy it 100 times, they would probably be fired because that is just terrible Revit practice.
Well,
So
I wasn't going to copy it. I was going to put it into a group for my suite.
Right. So in this project that we're looking at with the LTU residence hall, a great example there of a bad practice in Revit would be making a model group of one of the dorm layouts and really decking it out with maybe a plant and some detailed furniture, and then copying that model group over 200 times throughout the project. So those of you who manage Revit projects know that's just a really, really bad idea. It's going to kill your Revit model for performance. And when we're trying to create better visualizations and presentations within our Revit projects, ideally, if you were to just use Revit, there's a lot of tricks that we have to pull in just in order to manage not only the quality of the rendering, but just managing the geometry that we would need to put into the Revit model to make the renderings look somewhat presentable. So, the Revit families that you're using are probably not high detail. They don't look great in renders. The lighting, there's no environments other than the stock cloudy sky environments that you can put into Revit. The lighting control is limited. To assign IES files for artificial lighting, it's just a pain to set up visualizations using just Revit. So probably a number of you have explored different avenues. Some of the competitive products on the market are Enscape, Lumion. Some of you on the higher end might be using 3ds Max and V-Ray to do your renderings. All are great solutions. Twinmotion kind of fits in maybe right around that area of Lumion. I would say there are major differences between Enscape and Twinmotion and Enscape and Lumion, but really Twinmotion as a competitive product. If those of you on the call are familiar with Lumion, it's very similar in the workflows. So yeah, if I were a designer or one of Joe's minions on this project and I saw him trying to play around with rendering, directly in Revit, I would pull the mouse out of his hand and tell him that I can accomplish much, much more and make it look a lot better. And leveraging our Revit model, so the work that the entire design team has done to create these beautiful models in Revit, but let's present them. Let's take that to the next level and create some context and some really good visual environments. So
you're saying it's faster and better than what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, a little bit. Now this
so
is
then
it,
fine.
Again.
Prove it to me. Let me change you. I'm going to set you to be a presenter.
Okay. And I will throw out the warning. So this is something we've run into with GoTo, and we've tested it. When I go to share Twinmotion, sometimes my GPU freaks out a little bit. I think I fixed it right before this call, but if it takes a second for me to get Twinmotion to display, I apologize for that. So let's go ahead and have the same, fingers crossed. Okay, are you seeing my screen?
I see your screen. I see Revit.
Oh, thank goodness. I was pretty nervous with over 300 people on the call that we were going to get some technical issues. I do have Twinmotion open. GPU is not freaking out, so we should be good to go. So same project that Joe had here. At this point, let's get this thing prepared for bringing it into Twinmotion and making it pretty. So a few things I like to point out in a lot of the workflows and processes that you will be involved with in getting your models correctly, or at least in a way that they're very manageable in Twinmotion, is understanding how we want to set them up in Revit. For any of you who have worked in older workflows for FBX files into 3ds Max or even pushing them into Lumion, you're probably aware that when we export our Revit models out to these visualization programs, basically the rule is what you see is what you get. So whatever visibility graphics in the current view that we're in, whatever is displaying, that's what we're going to be pushing out to Twinmotion. So yes, you can turn all of your Revit family categories on. You can have all of your geometry in one 3D view and create one export for that. That's great. There are better ways of managing it, which I've conveniently predefined and pre-set up for this presentation. But before I go over some of the view templates and the view settings that I've set up and explain why I did what I did, I do want to point out that the file exchange that we use between Revit, SketchUp, Navisworks, ArchiCAD, Rhino, it all uses this plugin or this utility called a datasmith. A datasmith is a package type of file. It's similar to an FBX, and that essentially what it's doing is it's creating all of your 3D geometry or meshes, packaging them up into in a datasmith that packages all of those surfaces up into a little folder, but it also takes with it all of the image information. So in Revit, if we have, like Joe showed, that rendering, that really terrible looking red brick that I'm sure you've all seen at some point in working with Revit, the bitmap for that image is packaged up with it. So that material assignment is recognized in this export format. It's important for me to point that out because once we get into Twinmotion, I'll show you some of the different file formats that it accepts, and just understanding that certain ones do not accept the material exchange, but datasmith absolutely does. So the preferred method of exporting from Revit is using the datasmith plugin. You can still export FBX from Revit and then bring that into Twinmotion, but in my testing, there's some issues. Certain objects will disappear, not come through with the FBX file format. So this is a free plugin. Just download Datasmith, install the plugin into Revit or whatever other programs you're using, and use this format if possible, which it should be. So
to confirm with what you're saying, we're looking at sharing data between Revit and Twinmotion at prescribed times when it makes sense, not running Revit and Twinmotion all the time side by side and live linking and dealing with pauses from time to time as it's updating across.
Correct. Now, the Datasmith plugin for Revit does allow us to create, it's called a direct link. And essentially what the direct link is it takes one of these 3D views that we have inside of Revit. We can establish a direct link over to Twinmotion. And if we make changes to our Revit model, we can click the synchronize button and it pushes those changes up to Twinmotion. Twinmotion is not bi-directional. So any changes that we make in Twinmotion, if we're moving objects and assets around, if we're applying different materials, those changes do not get pushed back to Revit. So that's one of the big differences between Twinmotion and Enscape. However, in a model management scenario, I feel like Enscape causes a lot of problems because of it being bi-directional, in that the assets that we create in Enscape are going to really bog down our Revit models. And Revit, if we're primarily using it for construction documents, and project delivery, we do not want to overload our models with those really bad Enscape assets. So we actually have Keniston on our team created a blog post that should be going out sometime this week, comparing Enscape to Twinmotion and why Twinmotion, in our opinion, is a better visualization tool for that, mainly for that reason. But yeah, absolutely, Joe. My preferred or recommended method is to create exports and manage these in a way that makes sense to whatever project or whatever the detail of the project is for the use of rendering in Twinmotion. So we're kind of splitting this off to create a presentation model in Twinmotion. Now with the export, we can always re-export and overwrite the previous export and just refresh it in Twinmotion, and it will update. So I'll show you guys that in this presentation. So I know I'm talking a lot over Revit right now. I'm sure you guys want to see Twinmotion and see this. So I've already predefined and pre-set up a lot of these views for export. So I'll just talk through it briefly and then jump into Twinmotion and start to get into how an everyday user would use Twinmotion. So first off, these 3D views I've created, I've just taken the time to set up mainly the ones that have CBM and KH. What that stands for is when we get into Twinmotion and we go into import geometry. So this is how we create our Twinmotion scenes. We want to choose the Datasmith file that we've exported. And you'll notice that these names of the exports match up to my view names in Revit. I maybe changed them a little bit just to abbreviate slightly, but this LTU East Residence export CBM and the LTU Residence export KH. CBM stands for collapse by material, KH stands for keep hierarchy. I did this on purpose because I wanted to create two different types of exports out of Revit. The collapse by material inside of Twinmotion, what that means is once we bring these models in, any of the material assignments, so we have this really large aluminum panel wall around most of this building, so that's all one material in Revit. When using the import option in Twinmotion of this collapse by material, what that does is it groups all of those things with the same material assigned to them in Revit and creates them as one object in Twinmotion, which is great if we want to really optimize the model. It makes the models a little bit lighter and more manageable in Twinmotion. And it also allows us to quickly replace and swap out a material. So if we take the time in Revit to make sure that, hey, we're paying attention to a material assignment, it doesn't have to be perfect in the material itself. I don't really care. This could be called material XYZ. As long as it's its own unique material, when I bring it into Twinmotion, it makes it very easy for us to manage and apply a new material to it. So that's the combine by material method. So what I've done in this Revit model is I've essentially taken most of the core and exterior elements of this file, and just using native Revit visibility graphics, I've isolated those elements in this 3D view. So it's hard to see right now because we can't see into the building, but you'll notice things like the windows here are not on or not visible within this because windows have multiple components, framing, glazing, and that's kind of consistent across really all Revit family components, RFA files, so that we would want to have sort of more control over specific elements within the family and material assignment. So on the flip side of that, the inverse, I've created a separate view called KH, collapse hierarchy, or sorry, keep hierarchy, which does contain all of those objects isolated. Now, one other quick tip for those of you that have used Twinmotion before, or just a general good thing for a workflow, you know that in Revit, when we're using design walls or even just a normal interior partition wall type, it probably has the same material, or even if it had different, it's got gyp on both sides. And usually that's like a gray or a white material. Well, if we wanted to have the ability in Twinmotion to go into one of these dorms and paint the walls separately or assign different materials to different walls, then we absolutely would not want to make our interior walls part of our collapse by material, because basically once we replace the gyp color on one wall, it's going to replace it globally within the entire model. Now, maybe that doesn't matter to you. Maybe they are all the same. It's up to you to choose what's the best workflow. So there is just some thought process that goes into this, but I made sure that I created a filter in a Revit view that isolated my interior walls, so I could, once they're in Twinmotion, assign materials separately by element to those individual objects. Whereas again, if they were part of collapse by material, I would not have that control. I'd have to assign one material to all of my interior walls. So that's just the setup here. I think we've spent enough time. We're already half hour in, so let's get into Twinmotion. So in setting up those files, I've picked here the collapse by material file that I exported from my 3D view. Make sure I match up my setting collapse by material to that view, and then the options for bringing this in. This is something new in Twinmotion, but you can separate out. So Twinmotion does now accept the photometric web information from your Revit light fixtures. So you do have the ability to isolate just the lights, so the light sources, or the meshes, or all. In this case, I'm going to choose all because I've got decent light sources to my light fixtures. One thing I will point out to everyone, the light settings, if you're using the light sources from Revit, if you choose use original, it's probably going to wash out your entire Twinmotion scene. For some reason, the intensity values, the luminance values from the Revit lights are just way, way, way higher than they should be for the defaults. So if we use this, it's a bad idea. I like to just kind of level set that and set the intensity to 300 lumens. It's a decent level, and then we can go in and adjust that once the model is in. Beyond that, there is enable substitution. I'm not going to go into this because it's for the everyday user, but enable substitution allows you to map or create a file to support mapping of your Revit materials to Twinmotion materials. So a little bit automated based on a CSV file. Go ahead and import. This might take a moment, and if for some reason this starts to freeze up on me, I have this this file already pre-set up. If we do have missing maps, so this file we took from.
I was missing those same two in my file.
Yeah, these they're probably on someone's local computer that created the initial LTU East Residence Hall project. So I would assume if I went into Revit, I would get a missing map information in Revit. Yep. I'm just going to ignore it. It's only 2, and it's carpet. So if I need to, I can replace and put better carpet down anyway. So click OK. And that is the process for bringing in the import. Now, if I do bring in the keep hierarchy into this environment, that file is actually a bit heavier because of all of the different component geometry. It doesn't take a long time to process, but I don't want us to all sit here and wait for my computer for a couple of minutes. So instead, what I've done is I've already pre-created this file and brought in both of the different exports. So combine by or collapse by material is what we're looking at here. The second step, if I were to do this right now live, I would bring in my keep hierarchy model, which you can see. It's not huge. in its own sense. The Datasmith file is about 70 meg, but if we look, every time you create a Datasmith, it also produces a folder that supports that Datasmith file. That folder, let's look at the this one here, has every single different mesh, so it's going to take a while. Yeah, it's not going to show it because I'm in the import setting. But if I showed you this through Windows Explorer, there's going to be thousands of UD mesh files in there and all of the JPEGs that were tied to those objects. So that folder is a pretty sizable, it's a large folder. And it takes a while to process if I were to open it. Not a crazy amount of time, a couple of minutes, but I'm going to skip that. And probably in the time I took to explain it, I could have just let it run, but I will go ahead and open up our LTU East Residence, say no to this. And unfortunately, we didn't have a great site file that went along with this model. We did have a Civil 3D file, but we didn't set the whole thing up for this demonstration. So, all right. So anyway, did do a little bit of work here, but I wanted to sort of create an example. So, oh, and I thought I saved this. That's okay. I'll show how to replace. So this is the model. I made a mistake. I did a replace by material, and I didn't realize that these window frames had the same material as casework inside, so it replaced some material. I did fix it, but I must not have saved right before the presentation when Twinmotion crashed on me. So this is the entire combined model. You'll see the two exports there. One thing I do like to point out is if we make a change, usually the example I do is just grab a wall from Revit, edit the profile, and just punch a hole in it. Ooh, I got really close to overlapping there, but didn't. But if I'm in Revit and I make an update, that's okay. Unjoin those two walls. Oh man. Joe, you're supposed to be the noob, and I'm making mistakes here.
Well, see, I know how to use Revit. I don't know the Twinmotion side.
So I'll cut a big hole through here. All right, that's better. But in the Twinmotion model, if I want to reflect this change back, in the Revit model, if I want to reflect this change in Twinmotion, I would just go back to Datasmith, export, overwrite my original file. Yes. And then back in Twinmotion, all I would have to do is click on this refresh button on the import, and that's going to update. Essentially, this is what the, oops, did it not finish writing it from Revit yet? I maybe went a little bit too fast, or maybe I did it on a different wall. I think it was that one. Did I do it on that wall or this wall over here?
I think it was the left one.
Yeah. So I maybe have to refresh just one more time. And hey, it's not showing. So leave it to a live demo for something to not work. But when you start manipulating surfaces or applying different components, when you hit that refresh button upon the export, so I don't know why I'm not able to bounce back into, oh, okay. So Revit is still processing that. That's why it's not updating. But if we make a change, we just re-export, go back into Twinmotion, refresh it, and then that will show our updates to our Revit file, which is essentially the same thing that the direct link is doing. The disadvantage to using a direct link is that when you use a direct link, we are only able to direct link a single view from the Revit model. Meaning, hey, maybe I want to make my shell and core part of that, like make that the direct link. We could do that, and we can isolate all of the objects, but we're still going to have to create separate exports for all of the interior stuff. So you're already managing it sort of in multiple view exchanges. So why not just use the same consistent method of exporting? And now that's done. So let's see if I try to be a man of my word here. Something I promise, I like to see it update. So there we go. All right, so reprocess the big issue over here because the wall's disjoined, but you can see the cutout. The material assignment, so I kind of set this up on purpose. I made a change to that wall, but you'll notice that even when I refresh the model, my material assignment that I did in Twinmotion, I placed this nice aluminum material here. It remained intact. So it did not revert back to whatever the original Revit material was, including, like, speed up a little bit. That nasty red brick, I did take a little bit of time and put a nicer Twinmotion brick on the base of this, tried to match up real images, but as you can see, these materials are nicer. And while we're at it, because I made this mistake, when you bring your Revit models into, or any model for that matter, into Twinmotion, the models are managed from this thing called the scene graph. In the scene graph, we have these folders that are actually called containers. And at the top level of that container is just the name of the import. So in this case, LTU East Residence Export CBM, which matches up with my Datasmith file. Well, let's take a look real quick at the differences between collapse by material and keep hierarchy. If I expand out collapse by material, all of my elements, and if I click on anything in the viewport, it will highlight it in the scene graph. But all of those elements, even though they're part of different Revit elements or Revit families, they are all combined to be one object. So it's nice, like I said, it keeps this a little bit lighter and easier to manage, just in splitting it up by material. If we take a look at the keep hierarchy, this is where things can get a little bit out of hand. So the keep hierarchy, Revit, when we export, the hierarchy that's created is based on the host components. So it creates sub containers for all of your hosts, mainly the big ones for, there's a bunch of stairs which have some interesting hosting. But if I scroll down far enough, I will get to levels. So for Revit users, you guys know that levels are your ultimate host component in Revit, pretty much at the top of the food chain. Everything is hosted up to a level at some point. So let's see here. So this is a good example. This is just the third level line, the hierarchy. If I expand that out, we've got all of the components that are hosted to that level. And this is the way the hierarchy is broken down. Now you'll also notice that within a wall, we have multiple doors placed within that wall or hosted in that wall. And those doors are contained underneath that level in the scene graph. So it's just something you have to be aware of. If I turn off something like a wall, let's go and isolate. Let's look at this wall in particular. Hey, there we go. If I turn the wall off, it turns off all of the sublevels of that component. If I turn the doors off, we can do that. So all of your visibility within Twinmotion is managed in the scene graph. So this is sort of how you can isolate objects. If I do just kind of teleport back out to the exterior, something I did earlier and didn't save, like I mentioned, was grab a window, right-clicked in the scene graph, selected the instances. So maybe that's a single instance. I know this one here. So I selected all instances of that window, right-clicked and isolated them just to show, hey, we are able to isolate elements in Twinmotion. And now if I want to place a better type of material, something like a shiny white material, inside of Twinmotion, we have a library of components ranging from materials to vegetation, much better than the one that Joe was trying to ruin our model with. Different objects, lights, HDR environments, all of this stuff comes stock with Twinmotion, and they're always expanding these libraries with their own sort of cloud-based elements that you can download from the different objects and different areas within the library. So there are some really good stock materials, including just our basic, let's go shiny paint material. I can drag and drop that, and that's how easy it is to assign new materials in Twinmotion. We just take a material from our library, drag and drop. Now this material is part of the project, and we can manipulate it, change things like its color really easily, and it will update to that element within the project. Notice that it will not go back and overwrite your library element, so you always have that sort of that default material to start with. But once it's placed in the project, we can globally update it. And now we've got a bunch of nice little red window frames. So change that.
Let me rapid fire a few things back at you then. Because
Sure.
as I'm looking at the design and what you did, as you're explaining to me everything that's going on here, the brick that you dropped in there at the bottom, I need it smaller or larger, whatever. How do we change that to be a different size?
Yep. So in this case, the material picker is just your little eyedrop here, and click on the wall. It selects that material in the bottom, and this is called our dock in Twinmotion. So in the dock, this is kind of like, it's akin to the ribbon in Revit, how it's contextual. So based on what you've selected, if you're placing objects, if you're painting vegetation, the dock will update with whatever command sequence you're trying to perform. In this case, the material, if I pick it, it shows my material. And as Joe mentioned, hey, maybe we want to scale this up. We could just adjust the overall, the uniform scale or tiling on that material with the slider. You can always enter in exact values like 4.0 is 4x to tile that up. And you'll find that in Twinmotion, and this is something that you definitely want to get used to when you're testing or working in Twinmotion, these settings, under scale, there is a more button. When you go into more, this gives you additional settings for that particular item. So in this case, scale, I can rotate my tiling 45 degrees on that object.
Please no.
Then, yeah, so cool for the designer, not great for the
Bricklayer.
Brick mason. Yeah. So axis, we can stretch. So this is like your UV tiling. We can stretch it out in both directions to adjust it. We can slide it along the surface if we wanted to match a grout line up to the edge of a wall or something along those lines. So I just go back to 1, reset these back to 1, 0. Now in the dock, this is called the breadcrumb. Just to back out one step, all you have to do is go through your breadcrumb, click the previous, and it will bring you to the previous screen. So kind of like, I guess it's a little bit like the ribbon and contextual tabs where you're clicking on your tabs, just a little bit different. It's kind of creating that trail. Set my rotation back to 0, kind of get that back to normal. Okay. One cool thing, because of the way Twinmotion works, you might have surfaces that you want to animate. Sorry, Joe, you were going to say something?
No, I was going to have you take me inside the building instead of have the brick move, but that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so if you do have like conveyors or some type of scrolling, I don't know, video or something, you do have the option of actually animating your materials. And when you create your live animations in Twinmotion, that all updates. Okay. One thing that drives me crazy in Revit is this glass material. So I will go really quick into glass, just replace it. So another way to replace a material, I've just clicked my eyedropper to select this glass. If I want to replace this kind of globally throughout the entire project, I just grab a new two-sided glass material, plop it in. And another good word of thumb here, just glass, it's good to have normals on both sides of the glass. So I always force two-sided on my glass, which essentially will make it render like it's a dual pane type of glass instead of a very thin geometry surface. So sorry not to get too busy on everyone here, but yeah. All right, Joe, what do we want to do inside here?
This room is on the other side, I know that that was going to be a workout room. So you'd mentioned a library of stuff that we
Yes.
can pull in. What types of things can we drop in, or like give me some exercise equipment, so the treadmills.
Cool. All right. So if we go into objects, home, we've got some really good content, and good luck modeling this type of stuff in Revit to the quality that we have it here. So there's a whole bunch of really cool gym assets. So fortunately, we kind of obviously did this on purpose. This is a fitness area, but we've got some really detailed geometry. And if I scroll down and grab a treadmill and drop it in here, let's just kind of line it up. So one thing I'd like to point out is Twinmotion is not meant to actually be doing your design modeling, but I like to say it's built for creating the context. So in this case, we didn't, we could have a proxy object or some type of placeholder in Revit for a treadmill. There's no way that your treadmill in Revit will ever look this detailed in Revit. So we want to replace it with a better object. We'll show a method for that with some furniture in a second. But for the treadmill, one cool thing that Twinmotion allows us to do, I'm just holding my shift key down, dragging the treadmill over, and I can create an instance array. Let's go, hey, we've got 6 treadmills, set the spacing to something like 4.5 feet. And I've just created an array of treadmills. Now, maybe we want to add some more gym equipment. We've got some pretty cool stuff in here that we can choose from. This is all, a lot of it's stock. It's loaded with Twinmotion. Some of it you have to download. Anytime you see this little download button in the corner, that just means that the content is available for download. It's not chewing up space on your computer until you download it. And this is an area where they're constantly updating the assets in Twinmotion. So I know one big complaint that people have is about some of the stock vegetation in Twinmotion. It's good, like there's good trees and stuff, but it's not extensive, especially based on region. I will point out that in the next or upcoming release of Twinmotion, they are going to have more regional based vegetation libraries available. So not just like tropical or African, Asian trees, but we'll have North American trees and a lot more vegetation assets. So,
Okay.
So anyway, yeah, just going through, we can start to build this out. I don't want to spend too much time. You can see that there's some really nice detailed.
Yeah. So what about if we wanted to say, okay, this is great, it's daytime, take me to night and throw some interior lights?
Sure. All right. So let's go ahead and just shift our time of day to be nighttime. And right now I'm not using an HDRI environment. So we're getting, we call this the dynamic sky. And when you go to nighttime, you get nice little starlights here. Our artificial light is kind of the only thing that's lighting up the space, and it is very dark. These materials came in from Revit as illuminated materials. I can replace them with a better neon materials, probably like a daylight. Let's get right there. And control the actual glow option from that light. Now I thought, let's just verify here. I probably only brought in one of my samples. I had the light sources come in from Revit. I must have imported this one without the lights, but that's okay because in Twinmotion, I can grab these different light sources and create light distribution from an object. So you have kind of your native controls, intensity that you can adjust for a light and see that effect in real time. Attenuation will allow you to control the distance of that light and how far it's going from the light source, as well as your angle, so you can start to control your light distribution and see the impact of it. Now this scene, let's see, we've got a really bright light, still not washing the space well. We can change the color, temperature, and all of that. Some good stuff. Turn our shadows on, which we definitely want to do for artificial lights. But why is the space not looking like it's lit up? Well, it's probably just because we don't have quite enough light coming in here yet. Let's change our intensity back down, dim that out, make it a little bit softer. But there are settings that we can see. So one huge advantage of Twinmotion, just again for the everyday user, is you're really getting that sort of draft quality to display as you're tweaking your materials, your lighting, you're placing assets. You're getting a good representation of what your output is going to look like. And under lighting, if I just start to overexpose this space, I can start to control the amount of light or kind of the appearance of the interior scene. If I had all of the artificial lights placed on these fluorescent linear pendants here, I would be able to get away with a lower exposure. But let's go back to
It's all about effect.
What's that?
Well, what about if we wanted to take this into VR? Like, the people want to be able to see how's the spacing and how's it feel between the different things we got here.
Yeah, so Twinmotion natively has a direct plug, so there's a quick key to VR. We can just click this button as long as you have a supported headset, which all the major ones on the market, HTC Vives, Oculus, or whatever they are, MetaQuest 2, are supported by Twinmotion. And as long as you have a computer that's suitable for VR, so something with a good GPU in it, and probably a good amount of RAM. And then also something you want to pay attention to when going to VR is your frame rate. So Twinmotion constantly displays our frames per second. 33 is good for navigating around on my screen and maybe walking a client through a project, but it is not ideal for VR. So one thing you have to be aware of when going to VR is you'll probably want to optimize some of your geometry, or at least condense your models down in different ways. Maybe I do my whole export from Revit as combined by material to make it easier to process, less materials that it has to generate, less geometry. That will increase your frame rates. However, inside of Twinmotion, there are preferences for VR, and we can automatically set a threshold in frames per second. So what this will do is when we activate this threshold, or if our headset has its own threshold of 90 frames per second, or something maybe a little bit lower like 72, by checking this checkbox, it automatically determines what your frame rate preferences of your headset, and it will automatically degrade your geometry in order to run at that frame rate. So you might not get as great quality of lighting and shadows in the VR experience, but you're not going to get sick from running at a low frame rate. Or we can manually just set that, say, hey, let's set our activation threshold for VR to 72 is actually a good one. 90 is even better. So if we set that to 90, when we plug our headset in, it's going to adjust the shadows, probably make them a little bit grainier. Maybe your geometry and stuff will not have the same type of quality or texture to it, but again, it will be able to process appropriately in the headset that you're wearing. If I set my desktop settings down lower, this might give you a bit of an example of what we would see, maybe not medium, but high quality. This frame rate jumped about 10 frames per second, so nothing significant, but this is definitely something you have to be aware of when pushing it over to VR. So all you have to do is plug your headset in, click the VR button, and you're ready to go.
Okay, what about people that don't have VR then? If I need to get this out to somebody else who wants to look around that does not have a headset, or one that's good enough, does not work well with Google Cardboard is what I'm hearing.
Right, yeah, so we actually had a customer last week that said there's no way we're gonna get our contractors and for client walkthroughs to throw the headset on in a conference room. We just need something that we can share with them, that maybe we can guide them. We take control of the mouse and walk them through the project. So there are a couple of options. You could always present Twinmotion from your machine or from your computer in a full screen mode. And all you are doing to navigate around is using the WASD keys on the keyboard. I hate saying this because it has like, I don't know, for some reason, a negative connotation to it, but it's just like a video game. You're just walking through a level in a video game to navigate through the project to look at the design. The other option and we can do fly throughs, so it's just a quick change in pedestrian to walk mode. And instead of walking into the walls, now we can fly. I'm probably making everyone sick on the webinar, but you can fly right through the building. So you can do your fly throughs. The other formats for exporting or presentation. So I don't have this, haven't taken the time to create nice vegetation and stuff, which just really quick, I'll drop a tree in here. That's a lot better than yours, Joe. Scale that down, maybe paint some vegetation. This is one of the things I love doing in Twinmotion. It's just so much fun. We can grab sort of a palette of vegetation with grasses and weeds and all different types of really cool stuff. Let's get out of here. Let's go out into the open here, and we can start to paint this vegetation along the surface. Now, I will want to switch back to ultra high quality in order for this to display. But as we get into this, we can make, hey, we really need some weed block or something down here because we've got way too many weeds. Bump up my lawn, and once this catches up, and I'm always afraid to do this during the webinar, but you'll start to see these different, we're freezing.
Well, we've got like 1 or 2 minutes left, so
okay.
Don't have much to do with this. So it might have to go through a verbal description rather than showing us some of the different options we'll have.
So for output, when you are in a space to create an image output, you just click the plus sign to create an image, and it will create a camera. This is basically like creating a bookmark within the Twinmotion project. Once these bookmarks are created, you can adjust the image settings for all of these, so you can really tweak lighting, render settings, materials, filters, all different types of saturation, contrast, you name it. You can adjust your images, and it's stored in the image itself. Then once you have the image created, to actually process it to a PNG, you would just export, pick the image, and say your export. So you can control resolution and all that good stuff. Other output, we can create 360-degree panoramas. So again, those are viewable in headsets, or if you have like online 360 viewer, YouTube, Facebook, have them embedded. We can process or create videos really easily. So if we want to do a walkthrough, maybe start at this point, create this frame, move through the space, create a second frame, control the duration of that. The keyframing is quite simple in Twinmotion, but created 2 frames over 10 seconds. This is the sort of transition and movement that we get. We can jump completely to a different area. Oh, maybe not that area, but different area of the project. Okay, here, create a new part, create a new part to that video sequence. And maybe you just want to kind of move in slightly and then just do a little pan. This is going to be really slow over 10 seconds, but you can start to sequence your videos. It's kind of like a compositing program, very basic, but this is the sort of stuff that you can kind of do. And then you can export your videos either directly to an MP4, which I don't ever recommend. If you're going to make a high quality video, you want to export it out frame by frame and put it into post-compositing software. But Twinmotion does allow you to go into video, pick your video, and then control things like the format. So PNG is going to go frame by frame, which means we need to control our frame rate, and we can export all the way up to 120 frames per second. Cool. So we're right at 2. I figured this would go a little bit over. What types of questions do we have, Joe?
Well, let me go ahead and switch off and show my screen. So we've got the contact information. So we've gone through a lot, and there's, I think according to the phrasing my son would use, a crap ton of additional questions that have not been answered through here. So we'll do our best to get back to everybody that was asking questions and get some responses to you. But if you've got anything from this is just that slight, inkling into what's possible. We had a previous webcast that was taking Twinmotion into 4D modeling with Navisworks. There's all sorts of extra stuff that we've got on our site, but also just reach out to IMAGINiT, reach out to your account rep, and let's have that more personal discussion of what it might be able to do for you. In addition to, for as much time as I can convince Lori to let us hang out to answer any of the questions, and also for those people that are hanging around and have some time to hang out with us for some of these extra questions.